Hi everybody, this is Caroline from Zoobidoo. I'm glad you could join us for our next instalment of a video about snakes. So today I'm going to introduce you to my lovely Archer. Now Archer is a royal python. Now a lot of people associate pythons and the knowledge of them being very, very large creatures. Now this young lady, obviously, she's not that large at all because she can fit in both of my hands quite easily. She's quite muscular, as snakes are naturally anyway. Now this young lady has two names normally. She's known as either a ball python or a royal python. So ball python, they get their name that as a ball because they usually coil themselves up into a tiny ball to protect themselves from predators or danger. So they usually do this if they're a little bit worried or scared about something that's in their environment, and most of the time they tend to curl themselves up to protect their head. Now obviously you can see her lovely beautiful head there. And she's showing you her lovely tongue as well, which I'll talk about shortly. Now, she is a very, very special snake. Part of the reason why she got the name Royal Python is where she lives from in Africa. There are African tribes, and it's said that only royalty is allowed to wear one of these pythons. So over there, they would usually use them as jewellery, or a kind of jewellery around their necks usually. And it's actually been said that Cleopatra used to wear a python around her wrist as a kind of jewellery as well. So this young lady, obviously, she's kind of wrapping herself around my wrist naturally, and this is just her normal grip just to make herself feel nice and safe. Now, coming from Africa, the kind of Central Eastern Africa regions, they've got quite a good range actually. They're normally in kind of shrublands and savanna, and obviously the forest regions as well. And you can tell where she would most likely be found in those regions. You can see that she's got her lovely camouflage patterning here and colours. Now that camouflage patterning and colours helps her to obviously stay away from other animals and keep herself hidden. This also tells you a few things about her. She doesn't show bright warning colours, so that's obviously not something that means she would be venomous or dangerous. So she actually is quite a secretive animal and would prefer to be left alone, in all honesty. Now they are a very, very docile creature, very, very easygoing, quite happy to be handled such as this. She's been used to this from a very, very young age. So nice gentle handling with somebody that obviously respects her space and can read their kind of body postures, and if they're not quite happy about being picked up or handled and they're a little bit nervous one day, and it's up to us as the pet owners or keepers and carers of these animals to recognise how these animals are thinking and feeling on different days, just like we do, I suppose. She is an absolutely stunning shape right now. This video has actually been done in the evening time, which actually suits her best, as normally during the daytime these animals would be down a burrow. Usually that's their favourite place, down a burrow, something that another animal has maybe dug out for themselves and abandoned, or under kind of shrubbery and grasses and logs, staying nice and cool in the really, really hot African heat. Now they do like a lot of temperature, really quite a high temperature, usually early 30s, around 32 degrees. Other videos that I've done, obviously I've gone into a little bit of detail about different animals and the temperature, especially the gecko one. But I will tell you a little bit again in case you've not seen this. Now these animals are reptiles obviously, and unlike mammals like ourselves, they cannot produce their own body heat, so that's something that we need to help them with. So producing their own body heat would mean them being able to run around like we do and we quickly heat up ourselves naturally. They can't do that just by slithering around, or obviously if it's another reptile that runs or swims. They need to have an environment that actually gives them that heat. So her environment, obviously, when we keep them in captivity, we've got to try and make her environment as similar to her natural one in Africa. So obviously she does like a little bit of humidity, which means a little bit of moisture in the air. This also helps her to shed her lovely scales in her skin. And obviously she likes a nice warm temperature. So we provide either a heat mat or in some cases we would obviously give them a heat light or a lamp. Now that heat lamp is actually better for this particular species because they don't do very well on a matte surface, and that's purely because they like to kind of sit on there for quite long periods of time, and they don't always feel the heat from underneath their bellies. They usually feel a lot of the heat coming from above. So what we have is a thermostat which would turn the heat on and off depending on the temperature that you desire. And that would be in one end of her tank where her heat light would be, where her main basking area, so to speak, is. And then we would give her a thermal gradient, which means that they have a hot end at one end and then a cooler or a cold end at the other end, usually early 20s for that temperature. And this actually just helps them to make their own temperature comfortable, so they would move from one area to another like they would do in the wild to get this. Now obviously, talking that she's a reptile, she has the cold blood, so she needs this heat that we're giving her, but obviously just like we do, they need natural light. So there's different kinds of light that reptiles need. This young lady, like a lot of other reptiles as well, would need UVA and UVB. Now the UVA rays that we get from the sun, we usually get that, and that's a light level that she can actually see physically. So that obviously helps her to create a natural day and nighttime cycle, and obviously this is called a photo period, so they know when it's nighttime and when it's daytime. Now she actually prefers to come out at night, so she tends to be kind of dawn and dusk, very early morning, very early evening. That would be less predators for her being around. So this young lady is one of those animals that, yes, can be predated upon by other animals. So say monkeys, other larger lizards and even larger snakes would also predate upon her. And obviously some other mammals too. And occasionally you get the odd lion and leopard that would have a little go at these guys too. So the other part of her being a reptile is obviously these beautiful scales. So I'll bring them a little bit closer. So you can see the top end of her scales there, these lovely kind of diamond shaped patterns. And then if I just turn her around, you can see her belly scales. Now her belly scales tend to be long and flat. You can see those beautiful long flat scales, and they help her with her motion and how she actually moves around. So there are some types of snakes that like classed as sidewinders that kind of wind their body side to side, and that actually helps them in their locomotion. Whereas pythons are very, very different in that respect, because they do actually use their own rib cage to help position them to get kind of a gravitational pull to then push themselves along with the back end of their bodies, and obviously their front end with the grip. So they do move very different. Now they are very, very slow, less than 1 mile an hour. So obviously this kind of animal is not one that is ideally built for chasing its prey. So what we would class her as is an ambush predator. So this one young lady would obviously rely on her camouflage coloration to be able to get in and amongst all the bushes and the leaves and wait for her to prey to come past. Now, actually seeking that prey, she's got very, very poor eyesight because she obviously doesn't use this for tracking animals. But what she does have, if you actually see her on the very, very front of her lips, you can see those tiny little holes. Now, those tiny little holes, they're called pit sensors. And those pit sensors actually help her to sense the body heat of the prey that's coming by. And at the same time that you saw that her tongue was flicking in and out, she's actually tasting the air with her tongue. Now, a lot of people do ask me about the snake's tongue. Why does it have a split in the middle of the tongue? And that's purely to help them to sense which direction their food is coming from. So obviously if you have a split and a fork in your tongue and you have a prey item that this young lady wants to eat coming from one direction, she would get more scent particles on that side, so she would know to turn her body facing that direction, or likewise the opposite direction. So that is a very, very unique sense. Now this is actually a sense of smell that's actually going through her tongue, and that is also a very strange thing. She does have nostrils, but actually her tongue inside has inside her mouth, on the roof of the mouth, is called a Jacobson's organ. So that organ is a very, very sensitive organ that obviously picks up the tiny delicate particles that are in the air that then help her to be able to sense her lunch. Now then, I am going to pop her back in a minute or two. I am going to just show you the back end of her tail, and you can just see around the bottom here where the big long scales end, and then the other ones start here. There's a tiny, what's classed as an old residual leg or a spur. Now this little spur is very, very cool because this is what was left when animals and lizards in particular and snakes adapted and went from land creatures with legs and obviously get onto snakes. So there's a lot of information about that, but there's an awful lot about snakes I actually want to talk to you about today. The one last thing I will say, with her being a python, these are obviously in some ways known as pythons and boas, but they are very, very different from each other. So obviously this young lady is kind of a miniature python, and then you get the really, really big pythons like the Burmese python that are about 22, 23 feet long, and they are absolutely magnificent. Very, very heavy. Takes at least 2 or 3 of you to actually hold on to them because they are so heavy. Now you can just see she's coiling herself around my neck and my hair. It's one reason why I have my hair down today, because she usually tries to go through my ponytail. So I make my life easier by having my hair down at this point. So this young lady, being a python, one thing that distinguishes pythons and boas from each other is the way that they give birth. So pythons are egg layers. And then you have boas, which are live-bearing animals. So yes, they have their young inside their body, and then they hatch out and then they come straight out, just like, I suppose, mammals in a way, how they give birth. So it's quite an interesting distinction, but I have got actually a boa for you to actually have a little look at. So I'm going to put this young lady back in her tank, and I'll be with you in 1 second, just with one of the boas. Okay, darling. Okay, so next I've got to show you is one lovely, lovely girl. She is what we call a Kenyan sand boa. Now this young lady, again, is one of the types of animals that does come out in dawn and dusk again, just to keep herself safe. And as you notice, I do quite like what we would class as the wild, normal coloured animals. I've seen quite a few amazing, stunning colours of what they class as morphs in the reptile world, and there are thousands of different types of morphs in all different kinds of snakes and geckos and lizards and everything. They're amazing, but I do quite like the wild colours. There's just something about seeing them as they were created originally, and the beauty in that, rather than all these weird and wonderful colours that we do. But I do appreciate the colour variations, they're very pretty. Now this young lady is a boa, so a Kenyan sand boa, and she's called Bonnie. Now Bonnie is much, much smaller, as you can see. She's not using her body to grip onto me at the moment, so I have to support her entire body weight just to make sure that she stays nice and safe. Now you can see a few features of her. Being a Kenyan sand boa, she would normally hide in the sand, so she would burrow her entire body into the sand. You can see that she's got a very flat nose there. That is ideal for as like a shovel to get her nose right underneath. And you can also see that her eyes are positioned on the top of her head. That also tells you another thing just about her body shape, is that she would normally bury the entire body and then have the top of her eyes just poking out. Now that is another sign of being an ambush predator as well. She's also not one that is very, very fast, but my goodness, when we offer her mice or chicks or anything of her choosing, she is really fast. So normally when I feed these animals, I tend not to feed them in their own tanks, obviously not to confuse them, because when I go in with my hand, I don't want her to associate my hand with feeding. So I have a separate container that I feed them in usually, obviously not to get any debris attached to the food item that we're also feeding them as well, which obviously keeps them safe. So, so another note on feeding, it is completely illegal to feed anything that is live to another animal. Now that doesn't stay the same, that is for insects. Obviously insects are invertebrates, which means they have no spines, and these guys obviously normally would eat mice and chicks and other rodents, so this is something that I wouldn't be able to do with these guys, is feeding live food, for a few reasons. Obviously that mice have a vertebrae, which obviously means that they feel, and the sense of fear is obviously would be terrifying to be in a predator's cage. A I liken it to one of us being chucked into a lion's cage and how you would feel at that point, which obviously with animals is not something that you want to cause any suffering to any animal. So this young lady here, my beautiful Bonnie, she would have pre-frozen food that had already come to me, and obviously I would defrost that food and put it in a separate tub with her. This also keeps her safe as well, because obviously if you've got a prey animal that's in a cage, obviously the prey animal can occasionally fight back. And that's something that we also want to protect our reptiles from, is potential injury, because of how they digest their medication is very, very different to us mammals, and it can be very, very difficult to treat when they have injuries. So it's obviously important to lessen any kind of risk in that sense. Now, our lovely Bonnie here is one of the ones that we say that is a live bearing animal. So for her to have a live young, she would have them all inside this lovely, lovely body here, and it would get very, very nice and thick. So her live bearing days are over. She has had a couple of litters over the years. I have a friend that has Clyde, which is why we call them Bonnie and Clyde, and they're a really lovely pair. But our Bonnie here is definitely not one for having any more babies at the moment, but she's absolutely fascinating. Now, one last feature I probably would love to show you is that she's got a little bit of rougher skin just on the end of her tail here. This also helps her to bury herself a little bit more under the sand. So if anybody's of the adults world has been used to seeing the movie Tremors, I liken them to a tremor, because they just hide underneath and kind of jump out of the sand just at the right moment when their food is coming past. And she's having a really good smell of me right now and just sensing who I am and what I'm doing here with her. So obviously she's feeling nice and calm and quite gentle. And I do have another snake that I would like to show you. So I'm going to pop her back, and then I'm going to get out our next animal. Now, the next one I do have, she is absolutely amazing, and you will see a complete difference in the type of snake that she is compared to Bonnie and our archer, the royal python. But this young lady, if you just detach yourself from the tank, my love, there we go. This here is our very, very lovely April. April is what we call a milk snake. So she's what we class as a Pueblan milk snake, but there are quite a few different species of milk snake, but depending where they're from and which region, and obviously their patterns that are on their body. Now, this young lady is very, very strong. She can quite easily climb, but she's another type of animal that does prefer to be in a burrow situation, even though she's quite brightly coloured. Now, the brightly coloured, a lot of people ask me, oh my goodness, is she dangerous? Is she venomous? Can she hurt anybody? So I'm going to answer that question straight away, is that although she's showing danger and warning colours in nature, just by the colour of her scales here, she's actually completely venomous. She has no venom whatsoever, so she couldn't actually do anything to hurt people, although she does have teeth. Now, strangely enough, the python that I had hold of before has around 100 teeth, which is pretty impressive, but she doesn't have anywhere near as many as that. Now, this young lady here has never ever bitten in her entire life. She's one of the calmest, docile, placid snakes I've ever come to know. And she's one also that I've hatched myself. And she's coming up 10 years old. These guys usually live into their teens, and you can see she's quite a long length at the moment. She's just over 4 foot, whereas the python there was just a little bit shorter than that. Now, one thing that I would like to say at this point, obviously, she is a very, very beautiful coloured snake, but she's also doing something that's very extraordinary in the animal world, which is called mimicry. Now, she is attempting to mimic another very, very venomous snake that could actually poison you and cause you a great deal of pain and harm, which would be a coral snake. Now, the main reason that I know that she is not a coral snake and that she does not possess any kind of venom is that I know which way her bands are and where the bands are meant to be. So I'm going to teach you a bit of a trick in the kind of animal world. So we have red next to black, venom lack. Red next to yellow is no friend of a fellow. So, so these kind, obviously we know with her that she's got orange in between the black. Now there are lots of different varieties, like I said in the beginning, where they can be yellow, they can be white, they can be different reverse bands. Some of them are thicker, some of them are thinner, and that just tells you all the differences between the different kind of subspecies as such. Now, milk snakes are actually a species of king snake. They're not a type of snake that is very easily kept with another one, because they do have a tendency to eat each other, which is a very, very interesting fact. So obviously in the wild they would come together to breed for a very short period of time, and then the male would make a very, very hasty exit, because the females do tend to be bigger than the males. Now, this young lady, obviously, with her beautiful coloration, I can't resist showing everybody how absolutely stunning she is. She also has a lot of muscles underneath there, so you can see she's nice and rounded, nice and plump, which means she's a very, very healthy specimen. She's got very lovely shiny scales, although when they do go a little bit dull, they do tend to do what's called sloughing or shedding their skin, whereas they go very, very dull all over their body, very, very pale. And a very strange thing that she almost goes pink on her red parts here. And then once they've actually shed their entire skin, you would then see a beautiful, bright, vibrant colour again. Now, she did shed a couple of weeks ago, and normally it comes off like inside out, a bit like a sock when you take your sock off. It's inside out, and it starts from the nose end, goes all the way down and peels off the end of their tail. And at that point, normally you would create a little bit more humidity or moisture in their environment just to help them to deal with this, and give them kind of a few different kind of rocks and things to scratch off the edge of the shedding skin as it comes off them. But the amazing part is that these snakes actually have eye scales. So they do shed their eye scales at the same time as the rest of their body, which is pretty fascinating to know that. So at that point, they're the most vulnerable in the wild to predators. So at this point, when we are having animals that are shedding, the skin tends to be a little bit more delicate than normal. So we tend not to actually handle them at that point until their entire skin has shed off and they feel comfortable and they can see us again. Now, she's doing a very, very good job of smelling me and using her senses with her tongue all around. One thing I will note, when they do actually have their food, she would obviously eat a variety of different things, but she would normally eat mainly rats, mice, chicks, occasionally in the wild the odd lizard, and occasionally frogs. They come across a lot of things, and it has been known that young of these snakes tend to eat like a few little insects to keep their bellies full, because they do grow quite rapidly as they're young. On the other side of it, obviously you notice that her head is quite small, and most snakes' heads are quite small in comparison to the rest of their body. Now, how would they fit a whole rat or a whole mouse inside their body and inside their head? Now, a lot of people do ask that question, and some people are under the impression that snakes can dislocate their jaws, which is a complete myth. They cannot dislocate their jaws in that sense, and you can imagine that would be quite painful to keep doing that. So what I will tell you is a little bit about them. So in the middle of their kind of mouth parts, on the bottom of their jaw, they have it's not very fused as the bone goes there, so it's very, very stretchy. So that part of the skin obviously stretches, and it's the same at the side of their jaw bones. They do stretch their skin, and obviously the muscles inside, they're very, very loose, so they're able to kind of move their mouth parts over their food much, much easier. And like the biggest size of food item would be probably as big as the largest part of their round of their body in general. We do tend to feed them slightly smaller, obviously, to make their life a bit easier. But obviously you see big giant pythons that have eaten a whole gazelle and other things like that, and crocodiles even. So they do tend to get to the point where their eyes are greedier than their stomach can cope with. So with snakes, we tend to feed them usually every 7 to 10 days, slightly longer period of time that we leave in between for pythons. But it is possible for most snakes to survive best part of a year without actually eating anything, which is very impressive. But obviously at that point there's either something that could be wrong with them, or that they just haven't found a good environment for finding food, so it obviously helps them to sustain themselves a little bit. Now, she is one of our last creatures I'm going to show you today. So I hope you've enjoyed watching the video about the reptiles and the snakes that I've shown you today. Again, like I said in the previous videos, if anybody has any questions they want to ask about snakes in general, I'm quite happy to do other videos or just answer your questions on messages. So feel free to like the page and the YouTube, and obviously if you quite enjoy what Zoobidoo does, which is myself and other team members that would come out to schools and obviously parties and village halls, and the education side of handling animals and getting to know them, and obviously dispelling a few myths about them being scary and dangerous, or anything else you'd like to know, do feel free to give us a call or a little message, and I'm quite happy to have a little chat to people. So it was lovely to speak to you about one of my passions, which is amazing that I can do this job and enjoy it. Although being the YouTube videos, it's a little bit strange for me not having any interaction with people around, but it's everybody's got to adapt in these times, haven't they? So thanks very much for listening, and I hope you've enjoyed yourselves, and thank you very much to our lovely April, Bonnie and Archer there. So thanks very much. Bye.